Hello everyone. Today I'm going to sing a song composed by Rabindranath Tagore. My commentator is Saad with whom I am working on a project on the concept of idolatry across Hindu and Muslim religious borderlines. The question precisely what is an idol seems quite straightforward, but a methodical analysis of this question turns out to be a complex enterprise. The word idol has at least three distinct senses. Number one, figurative or representational art. Number two, a human concept. And number three, an iconographic object. An influential Hindu tradition called Advaita Vedanta would reject all these three senses in the ultimate analysis. The poet-thinker Rabindranath Tagore, whose songs I often sing on this channel, would reject, depending on the context, one or more of these senses. While one cannot, generally speaking, generalize about Hinduism, it is the case that Hindu traditions would not accept the sense that the Brahman, the ultimate reality beyond space and time, has literally become condensed into a 3-foot-sized object. What seems to be idolatry in these Hindu contexts is in fact a theological attempt to use the language of intimacy in referring to the divine who remains unbound by human imagination. This interplay of God's accessibility and God's sovereignty is reflected in the song where the referent of the word to me, you, is not obvious. Perhaps to me is the human beloved, perhaps to me is the divine beloved, and perhaps it is the latter because it is the former. Tumi robe nirobe hridaye mamo tumi robe nirobe nibiro nibrito purnima nishiti nishamo tumi robe nirobe mama jibono jobono mama khilo bhubono tumi ভরিবে গৌরবে নিশীথি নিশম তুমি রবে নীরবে জাগিবে কাকি তব করুণ আখি তব অঞ্চল ছায়া মোরে রাখিবে ঢাকি মম দুঃখ বেদন মম সফল স্বপন তুমি ভরিবে সৌরভে নিশীথি নিশম তুমি রবে নীরবে হৃদয়ে মম তুমি রবে নীরবে.
Well, firstly, thank you, Professor Barua, for allowing me to be a part of this fascinating series. Today's particular selection opens up fascinating questions about divine transcendence and immanence. But before I briefly sketch out some of these questions, I'd like to respond by two poetry selections myself. The first set of verses is from the Urdu poet Naz Khayalvi, whose poem Tum ek gorak dhanda ho, you are a puzzle lock, or you are an artful enigma. This poem has been immortalized in its Qawwali adaptation by the famous Qawwali singer Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. Although it's quite a detailed poem, I will read a few verses from it that speak to today's themes. हो भी नहीं और हर जा हो, तुम एक गोरख धंधा हो. You are not and you are everywhere. You are a puzzle lock. If you are not of my thoughts, then how did I understand you are God? You are a puzzle lock. I am perplexed at this business. What are you? Who are you? When you come to hand, you are an idol. When you do not come to hand, you are God. You are a puzzle lock. How can that which is encompassed by reason be limitless? How can that which is understood be God? You are a puzzle lock. Now, the term puzzle lock is a very interesting phraseology over here, which we'll briefly look at shortly. But there's one more smaller poem, and this time from the German poet Rilke, which captures a related theme. And I quote, "And if at night one holds you closely pressed, locked in his prayers so you cannot stray, you are the guest who comes but not to stay. God, who can hold you, to yourself alone, belonging by no owner's hand disturbed, you are like unripened wine that unperturbed grows ever sweeter and is all alone." Now, in both of these very interesting poems, one gets a sense of the mystery of God, that God is both simultaneously the addressee of your prayer, but at the same time He is beyond your comprehension or beyond your imagination. God is both within grasp as well as beyond grasp. And as soon as He is coming within grasp, He becomes an idol, as the poet says. And again, this is a deep mystery, that how can that which I am encompassing by my reason, how can that be the limitless God which I believe in? And how can that which I am understanding or visualizing or conceptualizing, how can that be the unimaginable or the absolute God? Yet this whole frustration is at the same time expressed in the form of a prayer in this poem. So while the poet is perplexed at the unfathomable nature of God, he is still addressing this as a heart-wrenching or a heartfelt poem to God throughout the whole process. Now, this poem and the selection that we read today opens up certain interesting themes which have been the staple of classical theological philosophical debates in various Abrahamic as well as Hindu and Buddhist philosophy. These are the debates on divine immanence on the one hand and divine transcendence on the other hand, or the incompatibility of God and the similarity of God with creation. These have been, of course, variously termed. We find various terminologies which reflect these emphases. You have the terminology of Nirguna Brahman, the Brahman or the absolute reality beyond gunas or beyond attributes, and the Saguna Brahman, or the same reality as conceived through certain attributes. And you have the terminology of Nirvikalpa and Savikalpa, without form or formless and with form. And similarly, you have Swarupa and Divya Rupa, God as He is in Himself, or as His form is in itself, versus the form of the God or the theological form in which we relate to Him for our worship. Now, again, this is of course not a place to go into detail into all of these debates or to resolve these debates by any chance. But this is only to open up these very interesting debates, and and to highlight this polarity that is maintained throughout all these traditions, and which is resolved or which is addressed or answered in different ways, and that is how you have the emergence of different schools of thought on these matters. Again, one important emphasis also seems to be that this, while that this actually seems to be a question of emphasis, rather than denying, absolutely denying the immanence of God or absolutely denying the transcendence of God. These various schools maintain both of them at the same time, while trying to emphasize one aspect rather than the other in various different ways. And how exactly can this come about? How exactly can opposites coincide over here? Has been maintained as a theological mystery throughout all these traditions. To just mention the phraseology which emerges in the Gaudiya Vaishnava school of thought of Achintya Bheda Veda, or the incomprehensible or unimaginable identity and difference of God, which to my mind is also sounds similar to various moves in Islamic theology as well when dealing with such questions, such as the theological tool of bila kaif, of both affirming something as well as asserting that it cannot be affirmed in a human limited sense, affirming certain attributes about God, but emphasizing at the same time that these cannot be understood in an anthropomorphic sense. The term which is used is, of course, of bila kaif, or without understanding how. Now, today's poem, of course, also has at the heart of it the key phrase that you remain embedded in my heart. It speaks of the God within, of the God in the heart. Of course, this reminds me of the famous Hadith Qudsi, where God says that my heaven containeth me not, nor my earth, but the heart of my faithful servant doth contain me. There are, of course, various instances in Islamic tradition, in Islamic scriptures as well. But in this context, in the context of today's poem, Naz Khayalvi's poem, you also find this thing re-emphasized, where the poet says that I tried to find you, God, in the mosque and the temple, but I could not find you there. But then I found you sitting within my heart, is what the poet says. So this idea that of today's poem, that God is, again, this is emphasized in various verses of the Quran as well, where God says that we are closer to them than their jugular veins. And when my servants ask you about me, I am near. Interestingly, Qareeb is one of the attributes of God in the Islamic tradition, where you have typically you have polar attributes. God is the life giver and the life taker. God is the first and the last. But in the case of this attribute, interestingly, there is no polar opposite which is affirmed. So while God is the Qareeb, the one who is close, the God is not the Ba'id, the one who is far or distant. While you have both names of majesty and names of gentleness, or names of immanence and names of transcendence, or names of similarity and names of dissimilarity of God, it seems that at the end the tradition tries to emphasize the overpowering or the overwhelming preponderance of similarity, or tashbih as it is termed. This is glimpsed just by a single hadith where again a hadith Qudsi, where God says that my mercy overpowers my wrath. So while there are attributes both of mercy as well as wrath, of severity as well as gentleness, distance as well as similarity or gentleness overpowers, and therefore you have creation rather than non-existence. Now, well, I mean, of course, all of these open up very interesting debates and very interesting questions, which this is again not the place to go into, but only to highlight a few more interesting points which emerge over here. Of course, before we move forward, there is also the Quranic, the very initial Quranic story of the creation of Adam. And when Adam is created, God breathes His breath into Adam. Again, what the precise implications of this can be fleshed out in the precise where it leads theologically is a different question. But these are certain pointers within the tradition which are open to exploration. Again, this poem, the poem by Naz Khialvi as well, which I quoted, shows us that when you try to grasp God as an object, he never comes within grasp, or rather, as soon as you grasp him, he becomes an idol of your own making. This is again also something emphasized in one verse of the Quran, where it says that La tudrikuhu al-absar, vision does not encompass him. Wa huwa yudrikul absar, but he encompasses all vision. Or the mind does not grasp him, but within his grasp are all minds, or all subjects. So it seems that as soon as you try to understand God as an object, he escapes, and that always becomes an idolization of God. Therefore, God may only be spoken of as a subject. Or to use another phrase which the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber used, God must not be seen as an it, but rather as a thou. Not something that I can grasp or that I can confine or define in my own way, but something that always eludes me, that is always beyond me, and that is always a thou. So therefore, God is not so much something that can be expressed, rather as something that is, as someone whom I can address. God may not be expressed as much as he may be addressed. Now, this again opens up very interesting names about God, or very interesting ways of thinking about God. Within the Islamic tradition, more closer to our times, you have Iqbal, who has this interesting phraseology where he discusses God as the absolute ego, or to put it in other words, as the non-delimited person. Again, the idea of God as a person, is God a person, or can we conceive of God as a person without thinking of it in anthropomorphic ways, is a major question in these various debates. But it seems that whether or not you think of God as a person, God is not less than a person. God seems to be something who transcends, that transcends personality, and is not below personality, is not impersonal in that sense, which is again reflected in various terminology within certain Advaitic traditions as well, such as the phraseology of Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, where God is being, knowledge, or consciousness. And both of these are again qualified by the final phrase, Anantam, or limitless, i.e. his being is not the limited being that we have, or his consciousness is not the limited consciousness that we have, but both of these are predicated of him only in an unlimited sense. Now, finally, to end with, the question of idolatry is something that becomes a major focus point for all of these debates, and that becomes a good symbol of applying these theological abstract debates to a more practical problem. Now, the interesting point, of course, idol or idolatry as such is commonly known within the Islamic tradition to be something that is, at least in worship, graven images are proscribed against. However, the term idolatry in the Quran, or the concept of idolatry in the Quran, is not just directed against graven images used in worship, but it is also against conceptual images or conceptual idols. Or, for example, there is that verse in the Quran which occurs in two places, where the Quran says that, have you seen, or consider the case of someone who takes his own passions as his God. So clearly, idolatry or shirk is not something that occurs just before an idol in the physical sense, but it is something that occurs when you substitute God for something else, or where you substitute the submission, reverence, obedience, and gratitude that is due to God to something else. Which does not again mean that you cannot obey or cannot be grateful to anyone other than God, but it only means that these other gratitude and obedience must be a subset, or must be encompassed within the gratitude that is owed to God, and must not go against that. So finally, it seems to me that the debate is not so much between divine immanence versus divine transcendence, although it seems that these are the two poles, and that the various schools are either emphasizing one pole or the other. Rather, the debate seems to be on whether the typical modality of transcendence and immanence, whether that is being divinely sanctioned or not. So, for example, the Quran uses various metaphors or conceptual idioms for God, which are, which is again one manifestation of this of a divinely sanctioned way of talking about divine immanence or divine transcendence. Although these may be limited metaphors from. And these may be metaphors that speak to human consciousness and human subjectivity, God chooses to reveal or manifest Himself in these forms, not because they may represent Him as He is in Himself, but because these may be the highest metaphors accessible to human beings to come or to enter into a relationship with the Absolute and the Ineffable. At least this is the argument which is given by a thinker such as Ibn Arabi, and we also find similar arguments made in Sri Vaishnavite traditions as well. Finally, the whole question of the idol is a very interesting question that emerges because the idol is a recurring theme or a recurring motif in Islamic poetry and literature. And I'd like to end with one final quote from another poet, Shabistari, and maybe just open this up to reflection of what this could mean. But the poet says, Musalman gar bedanisti ke but cheest, bedanisti ke deen dar but parastist. If a Muslim were only to know what an idol is, he would know that real religion is idol worship. Now this seems like a very scandalous remark to be making out of the Islamic heartlands in medieval times. But this is something which is surprisingly not atypical or not unique to Shabistari, but something which is found right from Rumi to modern day Iqbal. The use of the idol in this sense. And what this means for us, and what this poetic license and poetic language might offer theological reflection in the modern day is a different question, and which is worth exploring. Right. Thank you.
Thank you.